Josh Hammer, host of the brand new first TV podcast called America on Trial. It just launched this week. He's the senior editor at large at Newsweek, host of also the Josh Hammer Show. But Josh, congratulations on your new podcast here, man. Good to talk to you.
Mike, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. There's plenty of topics that you need cover on this podcast. I have to start with the E. Jean Carroll one because I don't know if this is the most damning against him or whatever, but I cannot believe that what I'm going to say is true. So please tell me I'm wrong. That you can accuse someone of rape, deny it, then be sued for defamation because you denied the accusation. There's no way that could be true.
Unfortunately, Mike, it seems like in today's modern justice system, that is indeed true. And not only do you get that opportunity, but you apparently get multiple shots at the apple. So there were actually twin litigation tracks here from E. Jean Carroll. So to back up a little bit, story was in 2019, if the listeners recall, E. Jean Carroll comes out to the New Yorker, reliably liberal publication, with these wild accusations of some incidents that may or may not have happened 25, 30 years ago in the dressing room of a Bergdorf Goodman off Fifth Avenue. And Trump, correctly, as any decent man would do, as you're implying, as any decent man with a modicum of integrity in his fiber would do, denies it. And she sues twice. And the verdict came out for the first lawsuit earlier last year, around last May of 2023, for $5 million. And then the second one dropped just this past Friday, which is the truly, truly absurd one. This is entering the world of the Twilight Zone. This is the $83.3 million verdict. And to make that even worse, Mike, it's $18.3 million in compensatory damages and $65 million in punitive damages. So to break through the legalese there, compensatory damages is a standard form of damages in civil lawsuits, and that's what the jury assesses would be necessary to make the plaintiff whole again, to restore him or her to the state before the underlying incident occurred. I have no idea how the jury even attempted to come up with $18.3 million here. I don't claim to understand why they think that E. Jean Carroll's reputation and her subjective ability to not be insulted by Donald Trump is worth $18.3 million. But to add insult to injury, Mike, that's $65 million in punitive damages. That's truly absurd. Punitive damages, exactly what it sounds like. It's punitive. It is a measure that courts put in simply to try to make an example out of someone, to so strongly strike someone and to harm him or her so that no one will ever try to do so again. Fortunately for Donald Trump, Mike, and this is kind of my deep dive analysis on the first episode of my new podcast on Monday morning. Fortunately for Donald Trump, I like his chances on appeal here because punitive damages of this nature are really looked down upon by the United States Supreme Court, especially when the ratio of punitive to compensatory damages, as it is here, is over a 3-to-1 ratio. There's a long line of Supreme Court cases, including a 1996 case called BMW versus Gore, where the court has just repeatedly said, you really can't do this, that it actually risks being unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment due process clause. So I happen to like Donald Trump's chances there on appeal, which is hopefully a modicum of solace for those of us.
The Atlantic headline is $83.3 million enough to make Trump stop lying. So that's the attack. Because I remember I saw some analysis afterwards, and it was the same thing. Is this enough to make him stop? Now, this was stop lying, this headline, but I heard someone say, is it enough to make him just stop? I thought, stop what? Exactly. I don't know. They just want him to stop. Who decided the $83 million? Is that the jury or the judge?
Well, in this case, you're going to have a jury who's going to go through the findings there. I mean, the judge is going to have to sign off on something of this nature there. Sometimes in trial, you do have no jury. You do have just a judge. That is, unless I'm mistaken, that's what's happening actually in Tish James's civil lawsuit with respect to the Trump organization there in New York. You have Justice Engoron, Arthur Engoron is his name. So that is not a jury. That would just be a verdict straight from the bench. But here in the defamation case, This was a jury trial, and this is also in federal court, Mike, and that's an important distinction to make. The civil case involving New York Attorney General Tish James with respect to alleged fraud from the Trump Organization, which is a chilling case, a truly chilling case for anyone who has any aspirations to be an entrepreneur or start a small business. The fact that the power of the state could be used to try to accuse your organization of fraud simply because they don't like the way you appraised your property and secured bank loans. Absolutely nuts. But that's in state court. This E. Jean Carroll litigation is in federal court, and that's an important distinction to make because the federal courts should, in theory at least, be slightly fairer for Donald Trump there. The state courts, especially the jury pools where you find these people from there, are going to be a little more inherently biased against Donald Trump in these very blue jurisdictions like New York City, like in Fulton County, Georgia with the Fani Willis case. But at least in federal court, he's going to get his shot on appeals here. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit is the appeals court in New York State. It's not one of the more conservative appeals courts necessarily. Back in the day, I clerked for a year on the Fifth Circuit down in Texas, which is a reliably center-right appeals court. The Second Circuit in New York is not that, but it's going to be a lot fairer than if he were in state court there. It'll depend on the three-judge panel that he randomly draws, but I think he stands in decent shape there.
Talking with Josh Hammer, editor-at-large at Newsweek. He's got a new podcast with the First TV called America on Trial, where he talks about all these different court cases for the next year plus. One last thing on the E. Jean Carroll. I could not find any reporting, so I don't know if you have it, like I don't know if it exists even at all, about the initial trial of E. Jean Carroll where the jury found that Trump did in fact sexually assault her. They couldn't say that he raped her, but that he sexually assaulted her, which then that justified the defamation case later, right? But the one thing I did learn that was interesting is that the only reason she was able to sue at all, because this was so far past the statute of limitations, this happened in the 90s, she thinks, is because of the whole Me Too thing. And like New York opened up this window where you can sue past the statute of limitations, right? So, but do you have any insight into the proof that the jury had or needed in order to find Trump guilty of sexual assault in the first place?
Well, so you're right, first of all, Mike. What you just said there is correct, that this was well past the underlying state crime statute of limitations, which is why E. Jean Carroll had to go this civil route there. And then New York State did pass this law with the legislature there, with Tish James and the whole clown brigade there in Albany, New York, leading the way. They passed this new law, changing the statute of limitations on the civil side simply to allow lawsuits like this to proceed. I mean that's part of the underlying outrageousness of this whole set of affairs, Mike, this whole sprawling lawfare apparatus, that when you look at people like Tish James, the Attorney General of New York, when you look at people like Alvin Bragg, the prosecutor in New York City, they explicitly on a Get Trump platform, which is borderline unconstitutional. I mean, we have very straightforward constitutional protections that prevent legislators from making laws targeting individuals. So it's not that far of a stretch to say that you can't run for office on a campaign of targeting an individual. But even if it's not unconstitutional, it's certainly grossly immoral and patently un-American. Nonetheless, that's what they ran on anyway. And this law that you referenced, where they changed the underlying statute of limitations on the civil side, not the criminal side, would exactly be that. Now, as far as the evidence that was presented at that first trial, where you had the $5 million verdict that was handed down last May, you know, it went down in the fairly standard manner in which an evidentiary hearing would go down there. But, you know, Mike, it's important just to underscore that when you're talking here about a he said, she said situation from 25, 30 years ago, these are inherently, they're structurally not the kind of things that courts of law should be engaged in. This is the reason that statutes of limitation exist in the first place there. The fact that New York State went above and beyond, went out of its way to change the underlying statute of limitations on the civil, not the criminal, but the civil side, to allow this suit to proceed in the first place, says all you need to know about the petty vindictiveness of the legislators and the leaders there in New York State.
This is E. Jean Carroll on Rachel Maddow's show the other day. Next to her is her lawyer, and I don't know who this other woman is, but here's E. Jean Carroll.
You've talked about using some of Trump's money that you're about to get to help shore up women's rights. Do you know what that might be, what that might look like?
Yes, Rachel. Yes.
Tell me.
I had such great ideas for all the good I'm going to do with this money. First thing, Rachel, you and I are going to go shopping. We're going to get completely new wardrobes, new shoes, motorcycle for Crowley, new fishing rod for Robbie. Rachel, what do you want? Penthouse? It's yours,
Nothing.
Rachel. Penthouse and France? You want France? You want to go fishing in France? No? Oh. All right, okay.
That's a joke.
I love her lawyer next to her to be like, joking. Jeez. Josh, we're talking with Josh Hammer, new podcast called America on Trial. Go check that out, thefirsttv.com, America on Trial, and everywhere else you listen to podcasts. This Fani Willis thing, so it's hard to keep track of all this stuff. And I have not taken the time to keep track of the latest with like her boyfriend or something. So what is the Fani Willis one and who's her boyfriend?
So, Mike, when the 4 prosecutions all came out last year, and it is very hard to keep track. That, by the way, is part of the whole reason that we're launching this new podcast, America on Trial, where we're trying to do exactly that for you and keep you updated on the relevant deadlines and the timelines and what's happening when and where and all that. So when these 4 prosecutions dropped last year, and just to briefly reiterate, the 4 prosecutions, again, there's civil lawsuits as well, but the 4 prosecutions are Alvin Bragg in New York City, there's Fani Willis in Georgia, and then the 2 federal indictments from Jack Smith in both Florida and Washington, D.C. Like many others, when this dropped last year, I thought that the Georgia case might be the most dangerous in the long term for numerous reasons. One is that Fulton County, Georgia is a very blue jurisdiction. That's Atlanta, Georgia. So you're going to have a very biased jury pool, one would imagine. 2 is that the underlying statute that Fani Willis and Fulton County invoked to charge Trump and his dozen or 2 dozen other co-defendants is a RICO statute that's modeled on the federal RICO statute, but it is much broader. It's a sprawling statute that really allows a lot of prosecutorial leeway there and runway. And finally, this is of course a state crime that would not necessarily allow for, hypothetically, if Trump becomes president, for him to pardon himself. So I was actually quite worried for Donald Trump. Wait,
real quick. I don't want you to jump over that. I feel like there's a turn coming, but I don't want you to jump over that last one. So again, Trump, if he wins presidency, would not be able to pardon himself from a state prosecution.
Correct. That would be correct as a matter of black letter constitutional law. Yes. Now, Mike, we're in uncharted waters here, right? I mean, we're literally facing legal questions that we've never faced before in this country. So these are all new arguments. And to be fair, I have seen some other people, including some very smart lawyers, make the argument that actually maybe he could. I saw Mark Levin make that argument on his radio show last summer. And then I saw Mike Lee, the great senator from Utah, actually say, maybe Mark has a point here. I'm not really buying it, to be honest with you. I think that it's a stretch. So the most straightforward way for Trump to not go to jail in Fulton County, Georgia, would either be for that case to be dismissed, for him to come out not guilty, or perhaps the most likely scenario is that, hopefully he actually defeats Joe Biden this fall. And then because they would just feel so ridiculous about prosecuting someone who's literally sitting in the White House, the powers that be in Georgia would force their hand and ultimately shut this thing down. But Georgia, the prosecution there might actually shut down earlier than that, Mike. So you actually have an upcoming hearing in just a couple of weeks on Thursday, February 15th there in Georgia. There's an evidentiary hearing about the Republicans in the Georgia State Senate's attempts to disqualify Fani Willis from this prosecution due to what you were just talking about, due to the fact that she seems to have, in very corrupt and indeed outright scandalous fashion, appointed her illicit lover, Nathan Wade, to be the special prosecutor on this case, someone with whom she was not romantically engaged formally, but nonetheless was buying plane tickets and jetting off to all sorts of locations. And then to make matters worse, we recently found out just over the past week or so that Fani Willis and her DA's office in Fulton County, they were actually in direct contact with the Joe Biden White House counsel's office last year, which just underscores the collusive nature of this whole sprawling get Trump lawfare operation that many of us have been sounding the alarm about for a very long time now. So we're coming up on a hearing in Georgia in front of a judge to discuss all these matters. Even based on the current timeline, Mike, the Georgia trial is actually not set to begin until August, which is pretty far out there. There's no way they're going to be able to get a verdict one way or the other, I don't think, in Georgia before the November election. That's assuming that this thing even proceeds in the first place. There's just a lot of questions there about misallocation of taxpayer resources, coordination with the Biden administration, and then this genuine sex scandal, if you will, involving her illicit lover, Nathan Wade, as well.
Amazing. So what's this hearing, and who would decide to put the kibosh on this as it proceeds? Is it a state representatives would do that, or would this judge in this hearing decide to stop this or something?
It'll be the judge. Yeah, it'll be the judge. But
okay.
the hearing is being brought. It's being pursued by Republicans primarily in the state Senate. So just this past Friday, actually, you had the Georgia State Senate that voted. I think the vote was 30-19. They had a chamber-wide vote where they voted to create a special committee just to investigate Fani Willis, and that committee has subpoena power. So they're gonna use their own abilities there straight up in the legislature when it comes to the subpoena power. But as far as actually putting the kibosh on Fani Willis, that would come from a state court there in Georgia, and the next hearing that we have there is on February 15th. Now, it is worth caveating that, Mike. It's not like this prosecution would die overnight. What would actually happen, technically speaking, is if the judge were to deem that Fani Willis herself is just too compromised, is too corrupt, has done XYZ things, and therefore she cannot pursue this prosecution, what would be more likely to happen is that the prosecution would then have the opportunity to go to a different county, which raises all sorts of interesting questions. Where would it go? What district attorney would take this on there? What does the jury pool look like? Recall that one of the reasons that I and many others were concerned about this prosecution for Donald Trump was because Fulton County, which is Atlanta, Georgia, is a very blue jurisdiction, therefore a very biased anti-Trump jury pool. So, at a bare minimum, if Trump can get that thing moved out of Fulton County to maybe a more rural part of Georgia, that's a relative win for him as well. And perhaps he might even be able at that point to get it moved to the federal court, which would be definitely a win because the federal court system there in Georgia would be under the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit, which is not a right-wing court, but it's a center-right court. So either way, things could shortly look a little bit better in Georgia for Trump than they currently do.
The county just north of Fulton, if I'm not mistaken, maybe it's two north of Fulton, is Cherokee County, and Trump won that 78% in 2020. So that would be a much better county to be in. Josh, we'll let you run, but what's the next court thing for Donald Trump?
Well, we have some hearings just this week, Mike. In fact, today there are some deadlines at the U.S. Supreme Court when it comes to the 14th Amendment ballot access question. That's another issue that we're going to be tracking closely on my new podcast there. This is the question as to whether the so-called insurrection clause of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment can disqualify Donald Trump from the ballot. So we have a deadline at the Supreme Court today when it comes to that litigation. When it comes to briefing, we're expecting an upcoming oral argument there at the Supreme Court that is set actually very soon. It's set just for next Thursday, I believe, February 8th. So that's coming up really soon. That's a major high-profile ruling, expecting a major ruling there that hopefully will affect the whole country. And then we're expecting a possible decision when it comes to Justice Engoron and Tish James's fraud fishing expedition. That could potentially come as soon as this week, probably next week at the latest. That could be a huge blockbuster as well. It's a chilling fishing expedition, but Tish James is seeking up to $370 million in damages. So that in and of itself makes it newsworthy.
We talked the other day to Gene Scherer, who did is it an amicus brief? Is that the right word for this? Regarding the 14th Amendment. And his argument is 14th Amendment Clause 3, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States who has previously engaged in insurrection. And everyone's focusing on did Trump engage in insurrection? And his argument is it specifically does not say president.
Yep.
It says Senator, Congress, elector, not president. Do you agree with that argument?
I strongly agree with that argument. In fact, I saw former U.S. Attorney General and federal judge Michael McCasey make that same argument in the Wall Street Journal in September. It was a very persuasive op-ed. I read it and immediately was nodding my head. I said, "This is exactly right." And Mike, a bit of a shameless plug. I plan on advancing that exact sort of argument on my brand new podcast, America on Trial, because it's a highly persuasive argument. Now, I actually think that the insurrection argument fails on probably 3 or 4 different grounds. But yes, this is very much one of
Let's
those.
start from the first sentence of it. Yeah. Josh Hammer, he is the editor at large of Newsweek, Josh Hammer's show podcast. But now we got the new podcast, America on Trial. How often are you going to have episodes?
America on Trial is going to be a daily podcast. We're going to have it out to you by mid to late morning every day.
Oh, that's beautiful. Okay, I'll be listening. Josh, appreciate you, man.
You bet. Anytime.
Talk again. Appreciate you. So this is going to be connected with the First TV as well. There's a bunch of different podcasts with the First TV, and this will be one of the big ones there. So that's awesome. Josh is great. America on Trial. You can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts, and you can go to thefirsttv.com as well. The President's Daily Brief is up there, which I don't know if it's still the #1 podcast on Spotify, but it was for a while, which is pretty incredible. And then my podcast is there too, called Politics by Faith, among others, thefirsttv.com. And we're simulcasting the radio show here right now on thefirsttv.com. You can go to thefirsttv.com. You can watch the show right now. And you can watch it also on DirecTV channel 347 and Roku and what else? Pluto and the First TV app as well. It's all there, and I'm grateful that you are here.